My name is Jane Remford. Welcome, everybody. We're very glad you're here. I am the chair of the Advocacy Committee at NSPN. Um, and so before handing things over to our moderator, I just wanted to say a couple words about NSPN. For those who are new or aren't familiar with NSPN, it is an association of civically engaged individuals as well as local chapters, and we focus on providing educational opportunities such as this webinar for those who are interested in building skills, creating networks, and advancing their careers. The Advocacy Committee specifically encourages members to actively participate in the policy process. We meet the fourth Monday of every month, and so our next meeting will be June 24th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You can find registration information on the NSPN website, and you can also join the Advocacy Slack channel, and that's where we do a lot of communicating about our events, such as today. So with that, I will hand things over to Haley, who will be our moderator.
Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Haley Cavalier. I'm a PhD candidate in environmental epidemiology at NYU Grossman School of Medicine. And I'm in the Science Advocacy Committee, as well as being the Science Policy Chair of NYU School of Medicine Science Policy Communications and Diplomacy Group. So I'll be moderating the discussion today on public commenting and engagement in science advocacy. Just some logistics. This webinar is scheduled to go until 2:15, and we plan to have time for questions at the end. So you can feel free to raise your hand and speak or put your questions in the chat. But I'm going to first introduce our panelists who come from diverse science and policy backgrounds and bring rich experiences to today's conversation. So we have Janae Eo. Janae currently serves in the Biden-Harris administration as a policy advisor and previously worked at Chamber of Progress, a tech policy industry coalition, as their director of financial policy. Janae has held positions in the provost office at Howard University and in the U.S. House of Representatives, working on education and financial services policy for Representative Joyce Beatty, and the House Financial Services Committee's Subcommittee on Diversity and Inclusion. Janae is a proud Hokie, graduating with a bachelor's degree in economics and history from Virginia Tech. So hi, Janae. Katie Pelch, PhD, is a scientist on the toxics team in environmental health at NRDC, where she primarily works to reduce our exposure to PFAS and microplastics. Katie's blogs and policy analyses can be found on her NRDC expert page, including many of the technical and scientific comments she has submitted on state and federal PFAS drinking water standards. Katie also continues to publish in peer-reviewed literature on PFAS. She is also a co-founder and co-developer of the PFAS Tox database, which is an online database with over 1,000 studies investigating the health and toxicology of various PFAS chemicals. So thank you, Katie, for being here today. And then lastly, we have T'Pring Pequado. Dr. T'Pring Pequado is the first executive director of the National Science Policy Network. Dr. Pequado brings her experiences as a neuroscientist, as well as former roles as the chief policy director at California Issues Forum, senior policy researcher at RAND Corporation, professor of ethics and policy design at Pardee RAND Graduate School, and president of AdSteam to her role at NSPN. Dr. Pequado also leads the TMP group, which provides advisory guidance and analysis on active bills and major issues being considered by state legislators, including issues of economic recovery, homelessness, housing, banking, insurance, workforce development, and public health. Dr. Pequado earned a BS in computer science from Georgetown University and a PhD and MS in neuroscience from Brandeis University. So welcome, everybody. We're really excited that you're here. We're really excited our panelists are here to talk about their experience in science policy and specifically in public commenting. So first, just to introduce yourselves and the topic, I would like our panelists to give us a brief description of the work that you're currently doing in science policy and advocacy. So, and please feel free to include positions that you have held where you've provided or received public comments. And Katie, we'll start with you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Haley. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you. So my career in this space really kind of started to take off, I would say, after my postdoc. So I did a postdoc at the National Toxicology Program, where I became steeped in the methodology of hazard identification for environmental contaminants and environmental chemicals. So this is a process where we identify chemicals that are harmful, and then the next step is to take regulatory action on those chemicals. And after my postdocs, I really became deeply engaged in the process of how we identify those chemicals and communicate the hazards that might be associated with them. And then after that, I worked for a small NGO called the Endocrine Disruption Exchange. And the role of that NGO was really to kind of straddle the try to help academic scientists and connect with more of the policymakers and try to help bridge that gap, that communication gap that can sometimes exist. And so during that time is when I really started engaging in writing public comments and trying to, there's the really technical information that the scientists have, and then there's the higher level, more lay analyses that the regulatory agencies or the legislators and the policymakers might be more comfortable and more familiar with. And so one of our goals at that organization was to kind of play that that intermediate role in translating some of the science into more policy relevant work. And then I think that I have really extended that skill set and beefed that up to being more of my full-time responsibilities here as a scientist at NRDC and on the environmental health team.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. Janae, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, so hi everybody. I'm currently working for the General Services Administration. I'm in their Office of Congressional Affairs. And so what I'm doing right now is essentially communicating to Congress about what GSA is working on. We are doing a lot of things in the climate space, so that's where I am right now. It's an interesting transition away from financial services and technology compared to my last role at Chamber of Progress. While I was at Chamber of Progress, I did a lot of public comments, I did requests for comments, requests for informations from other agencies apart from GSA. And while I'm at GSA right now, I don't do a lot of requests for comments, but I do receive a lot of information from third-party organizations that work on green certifications, as well as implementing some of the things from the President's Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the bipartisan infrastructure law.
Right. I guess that leaves me. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here today. So in my role as executive director at NSPN, there are quite a few public comments, but not in the way that you may think with the legislature or Congress. There are actually a lot of decision makers that need to know about our vision and our plans for the future. So that's a form of public comment also when you're thinking about nonprofit organizations. In my past, I've produced testimony, I've written in public comments, and those are a very formal process. There's usually requests or periods of time where you can do comment period or testimony, either verbally or written. But an additional component that I want to just toss out there for discussion, possibly during this time, is what we call sort of opposition or support letters. And who they go to can be a variety of people. So it could be presidents of companies, it could be coalitions, it could be nonprofits, it could be the legislature, right? And we hear mostly about that in our public discourse. So it certainly can be to committees and departments. But there's a wide variety of ways that you can do comments that are important for public discourse or important for engagement in the future and actually can have an impact. I guess the last sort of aspect that I'm thinking is when coalitions come together to write a public letter, something that they share publicly. And so that's a form of public comment on an issue or a bill or something going through our systems.
Thank you, Chipring. I'm actually going to pivot and kind of bounce off of that explanation and so public engagement with policy happens in many ways, and the system can be difficult to navigate. So what are some of the entry points into science advocacy and public commenting, and how do you recommend to navigate the system? And
I feel like
Janae.
Janae had.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she jumped for it. There we go.
I can take that one first. I think the biggest thing is identifying other people that are in your space, that are also working on the same issues as you. And then, just working on whether, if you put out a paper, like a research paper, posting maybe like a blog post about it, writing an op-ed about some of your findings. I think that's also something that's really helpful to kind of get your name out there. I also think that when you're thinking about the public comment process, a lot of these agencies, they're asking for, they're asking for information. So they want information from people who are, really in the field, who know what they're doing. And so you can start doing that by just, publishing your work in an informal way, through like a blog post or an op-ed. That's kind of how you can build your credibility. And then I know we're going to talk a little bit later about group, like coalitions. But if you do like an open letter as well, that's also another way to kind of work with, other people as well as other, third-party organizations to establish credibility and just get your feet wet.
I would echo that. I work for an NGO that works in coalition spaces, like very different coalition spaces, depending on what the topic is. And my experience has been that if you are a scientist and you're willing to write a letter, the coalition members don't always have scientists on staff. And so they will jump at any chance to bring in a science voice in their letters and scientific support. So kind of identifying some of the advocacy organizations that are active in that space and reaching out to them is also a good way to get involved.
I think I'm going to build on that only in one dimension. I think it's really important to be the person that has that background. So you can certainly have opinions and thoughtful ideas, but as you're writing in your professional capacity, make sure that you have some level of credibility, that you've published on that area before, that you've been working in that space for 3 to 5 years. If you're early career, if you're mid-career, obviously you get more of that credibility and trustworthiness. So you can certainly lend your thoughts and considerations from your, as a scientist, as a highly credentialed person in the, constituency group. But if you're going to be specifically targeting a request for change or consideration, make sure that you have some ability to show that your background fits why it's reasonable for you to be the one sharing that information.
Totally, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like it's really important to be a visible expert in the space that you want to advocate in, and that makes a lot of sense. Awesome. So, you all have experiences in different areas. So there's the advocacy organizations versus advising elected officials, etc. So could you talk about the importance of public comments in these specific areas?
Yeah, I might have the most diverse background. So one of my jobs was I was a CCST fellow, right? And so in that program, we spend a year being placed in the California State Capitol, and I was placed in Senate Human Services. And so in that role, it was essentially the same thing as a committee consultant. And so I didn't offer public comment. We had public comment periods where we would accept written comments as well as we would have a committee meeting. So there's 2 opportunities there. You can write public comment on a bill specifically, and then you could come in and talk about public comment. Writing public comment, I would just say generally it gave you more time and real estate, if you will, to explain yourself. In the public comment in California, if you're not invited to be one of 4 people, 2 in support, 2 in opposition, you get generally 2 minutes to speak on a good day with not a lot of public comment. On a bad day or a day where there's, 100 people in line, you only get to say for your public comment, your name, your organization, and your position on the bill. So to Pring Pequado with nationals, I would never do this for NSPN, so I'll switch to Pring, CEO, president of the TMP group, in opposition of AB 123. To Pring Pequado, president of the TMP group, in support of SB 345, right? That's all you get. So public comment in that arena is very limited. And I would say I would encourage you to write it out. And you can do both. You write it out, right? Send it in, write it out. So that's a public comment. Another public comment that I've had the opportunity to engage in is in informational sessions. And informational sessions actually is another time where you can verbally provide public comment on a topic. Now, informational sessions aren't always available. Sometimes you find out about them, really, a day or two before. So what I would say in the informational hearings or in the informational meetings, even if it's a group, is that the way to stay connected is to be integrated into organizations. So join these coalitions, stay tuned with the newsletters of NRDC if that's an area of particular interest, join the Chamber of Progress newsletter to find out what Chamber of Progress is up to. Find out what NSPN is up to, although, as we're a strict nonprofit, so we aren't advocating for any bill or issue, any bill in particular, but we certainly have issue areas that we might be connected with opportunities going on. So there are a lot of ways to provide public comment that aren't necessarily within the legislative process. There's also regulatory public comments, and those ones, I think I'm going to pass it to at least Janae, and I think Katie has more of the regulatory. I've only ever once participated in the regulatory public comment process, but that has a back and forth. So in the regulatory fields, they have to respond to substantive comments, and then there's a process to that. And then the last part of public comment that I would encourage you guys to think about is this opportunities in journals to write the open letters. I think that's an area where you get to design it yourself on a topic that's not necessarily with a meeting or tied to a legislative date, and it has more flexibility on what you can talk about in the public arena. I'm going to pass
That
it
was
to
a super great overview. And I would just say that the audience for all of those different types of comments are very different. And I think that that's like one of the things to have most in the forefront of your head is who is the audience for what you're communicating. I personally love the really deep technical, more real estate space of technical scientific comments that are often in response to regulatory requests for information or technical reviews of documents. Like that's my favorite place because I still get to do science and provide a scientific analysis and scientific input. And it's more about like how I've reviewed the data and analyzed, and a little bit less making sure that I hit the specific talking points in a 2-minute time frame that convey our organization's policy. So those are my favorite, but that I think that's just my personal preference. Janae.
I would say from the regulatory standpoint, and this is for US based regulation, there's a process where where the agency, sometimes they'll issue a request for information. And this could be on an emerging topic, this could be on, anything that they just want general information on. And that's really, I would say, the key opportunity to get in any substantive comments that you might have on a specific issue. The reason why is because during the rulemaking process, generally when requests for comment on rulemaking is proposed, the agency has already made up in their mind that they're going to implement this rule. And so, it's part of the Administrative Procedures Act where an agency has to share when they're making public comment, and then request, feedback on that. That's part of the act. But they really want your feedback during that request for information. And sometimes the request for information that can come, maybe a couple of months before possible rulemaking, sometimes a year or two. It generally depends on the agency. So that request for information part is very, very critical. If you have, a strong opinion on something, or if you have data, if you have research, if you have facts, go and share that information with the agencies, because by the time there's requests for, comment on a rule, or they're, starting to prepare a final rule, it's already fully baked. So that request for information part is where you can get, the agency to kind of sway your way if possible. But I would say most agencies have a process where they respond to your comments if it's substantive. So I wouldn't recommend, if you are submitting a comment, doing like a coalition, not coalition. What's the word when you have a lot of people sending in the same form letter? That's generally not
a call to action,
call to action. Yeah, action alert. Those aren't really the best things to do if you're responding to a rule, or a request for comment on a rule, or even a request for information, because the agencies are really looking for critical information that can, help them, determine whether or not they should even proceed with making a rule at all. But I would say, when you're doing a regulatory process, this whole process can take anywhere between a couple of months to a couple of years. Sometimes there are lawsuits if the rule is extremely controversial. I know, just based on my work in financial services policy, the SEC, they put out a rule requiring publicly traded companies to issue, ESG reports. And so that's being held up in the judicial space. But, there's really a lot that goes into the rulemaking process from the government's perspective. But usually the best time to get your information out to the agency is at the beginning. You have to be the first person to the party, and they want substantive information. They may not want high level communications as you would if you're going through a legislative process.
Yeah. And I think another area to find out about that space, if you're interested in it, is looking at your state's commissions. There are probably a wildly amazing amount of commissions that you have no idea about. I'm going to take a guess, in California, there are over 300. And so one of the most fascinating ones I've recently joined as like an observer, and I get their every other month meetings, is I'm going to forget the name, but basically it's a commission to look at antitrust regulation. And I just think that's fascinating, right? And so you can just pay attention, right? It's for the public. They're publicly available. Sometimes you just have to get on their meeting list so you can get their Zoom and everything. But a lot of them have transferred to Zoom compared to being in person. And that's great. And so yeah. And I think I want to talk about what you highlight what you said, is there's a time for a call to action where it's that form letter and you want everyone to send it in, right? All 350 million Americans, right? But then there's a time when the details matter, the substance of it. Your science background comes into play, your science and tech and engineering backgrounds come into play. And so in rulemaking, it's really that substantive comments that make a difference, that the people actually read and appreciate. The volume just gets put into a stack and it's like, thank you for participating. However, in legislative matters, the volume does matter. So if they can write in the analysis, 215 people sent a letter in opposition, whereas 2 people sent a letter in support, it's not that popularity contests win. It's just another component to be like, well, maybe there's something here that we're overlooking. Maybe we should go ask the experts. Maybe we should take a reflective contemplation moment to it. So there's a volume and there's a substance kind of differences. It's important to know the difference.
And then to build
Right.
off on what you said earlier, to bring I think that the comment space and journals is really important too. So that's an opportunity to talk to your fellow scientists and kind of either get them involved in the advocacy or start to, academic research is a very, very slow moving, very large ship. But in order to reach them, you have to publish where they're reading. And so I think that those are really good opportunities to start to move the needle in that space as well.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks so much. So you touched on this a little bit, especially talking about the mass commenting campaigns versus more scientifically based technical comments. But given that there are different ways in which public comments are perceived and incorporated into decision making, could you discuss strategies regarding what makes an effective comment or commenting campaign? So, maybe some coalition building strategies for public comment campaigns, or when the different strategies are more effective.
Boy, if we knew that, we would probably raises and promotions. I'll put in more of like questions and considerations. I don't know the answer to that. And if Katie or Janae do, please jump in. So one of the things as a strategy when I'm in an opposition position, right? I don't like what's really going on. I see some flaws, is I take the approach that it's quite easy to say it's a bad idea. It's bad in this way, to point out the flaws. There are flaws in everything we do as human beings, right? We are a flawed organization. But it's much harder to give suggestions of possibilities, right? I understand the spirit of this. Here are some possibilities. So the possibilities actually can be strategic. So the possibilities can be real, genuine approaches to take that might be better in this dimension or that dimension. But sometimes giving a possibility of 3 alternative good positions just adds in other people that will find flaws in those other 3 approaches. And so I'm really just trying to flood the system with possibilities of like, I'm just going to take a big global thing is like, we want to eradicate disease in the United States, right? There's probably a lot of approaches for that. And if I say like, oh no, we just need a campaign of washing our hands. Oh, we need a campaign of vaccinations. Oh, we need a campaign of, protective equipment. Those are all fine. And then other people will pile on those and be like, no, not just washing your hands. We're creating super germs, and like not just protective equipment because we can't afford that, right? And then that just sort of sharing possibilities can be a strategy to also highlight why a policy may have no one great approach. The other portion that I do really like is criticizing the policy that as it's being proposed and providing a single plausible possible alternative, but also for it to be most effective, I get other people involved that support that idea, that can reinforce that idea. And that is a huge undertaking, right? And that's probably not in your early career portion. It's probably not even in your mid-career portion, but organizations like NRDC do that day in, day out, right? And so they come up with an alternative approach because they have scientists on staff. They pitch that approach, they get coalitions incorporated into that approach from varying angles, and then they go out and set that approach into the world. I also I'm not affiliated with NRDC. I just really appreciate NRDC. I've actually worked on both sides in opposition and in support of issues with NRDC. So I have no affiliation other than some of my friends work there too. And I have a board member that's on NRDC. I just wanted to put that out there, but I use it as an example because it is such a strong organization in a variety of dimensions, not only just with the talent, that are there. And Katie, I don't know you, but I'm sure you're talented too, from what I've already heard. But it's a national organization that does such good work in the activism, advocacy approach level, that you can really just go on their website and learn all you can from their strategies and sort of build your career around that aspect. And since we have Katie on the line, I might as well use it as an example.
Thanks. I guess I'm struggling a little bit with how to answer this question, because I do work at NRDC, and when we have these conversations internally, it's a big conversation. It's a strategic conversation with comms, media, lawyers, scientists. Just a ton of people are involved in figuring out, is this the right time and the right audience to send one of these higher level mass action alert campaigns, or is it more of a technical? And so I think from an organizational standpoint, there's a lot of strategy. But I think to our audience here today, primarily thinking about maybe getting into advocacy and public commenting as individuals, or at a smaller level, not organizationally, I think that it's a little bit different, right? You're not going to have those same things to weigh on. Maybe in that case, your thought process is more a little bit about, like, do I engage with this action alert, or do I look for outlets to share my technical comments? I think that the question there is a little bit different. And I think it goes back to something Pring said earlier, which is to really think about where your expertise are, and make sure that you are comfortable talking about that. Like, if you sign on to an action alert, there's probably not going to be a journalist that calls you to ask you for your opinion. But if you do submit technical comments on kind of some arcane thing that you are really an expert on, and think that, like, it might only be you and 6 other people, or less sometimes, that submit comments, then a journalist might come to you, and you should be ready and comfortable to answer those questions and to support why you put in the comments that you did. So I think that that's kind of where I think about the difference in, like, really technical comments versus this more action alert, just signing on to something that somebody else has already written kind of approach.
Yeah, and I would encourage you guys, if you are at an organization or university, even when you're using your own name, if it's going to be something higher profile or something that you don't know whether it's high profile, go to your organization, because there are government relations and lobbyist rules. And you just want to be very cautious that you're following your organization's rules, particularly if it's going to be high profile.
Janae, did you want to comment on that?
Sure. I would say, there's nothing wrong with starting small. Sometimes, you can look at things that are happening in your backyard. I mean, in your city, you can lead a campaign instead of signing on to, I don't know, plant more trees in, Nevada. You can go to, your city. You can go to the city of Reno and sign up to be on a committee that focuses on planting trees, and then starting your campaign there. The reason why I say start small is because usually you can pick up momentum with mass campaigns at the federal level. When people that are at the federal level see you do the work at a local level. That's at least been my experience working in Congress, where, a member is much more likely to be invested in an issue if they're seeing constituents that have continuously engaged in the issue. And usually that's from, the civic engagement and, coalition building at the grassroots level. So I would say, like, if you see an issue that you're really passionate about, I don't know, like save the whales, that's just the first thing that comes to mind. When I worked on the Hill, we would get so many save the whales, or save this animal, or save that animal. And you can, add your name to this list. Usually like a conservation group will do like a mass mailer. You just add your name, and then a form letter goes out, in your name. But I mean, you could also go to, if you're in a, Bayside town, you can go to your, local community and, get more active in, whale conservation there. or even ocean conservation there. So I would say I would always recommend starting small and build your way up. So like it's like a snowball effect, just so that, and that also helps establish credibility for you in the space as well. When it comes to, working with people at the federal level or at the state level on issues that really matter to you.
Great, thank you so much. So, just in your experiences, how much does public testimony and public comment affect the decision-making process? And I know this is probably different based on the context and situation, but what contexts and situations are you more likely to actually have an impact?
From an individual perspective or from an organizational perspective?
Both.
Okay.
A couple different
Well,
answers on that. Yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah, I can't speak on behalf of my agency, but I can speak as an observer of multiple agencies when it comes to the public comment process. Generally, some are much more receptive to information than others. Thinking about some of our agencies that have top scientists and that sort of thing, they generally rely on their science staff or people that are on scientific councils. I know when it comes to critical issues in science and technology, a lot of agencies, they really rely on PCAS, which is like the Presidential Committee for Science and Technology. They really rely on recommendations and reports from there, and that's run by the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the Executive Office of the President. But there are some that really do take information that you provide them at that request for information process, not the request for public comment on a rulemaking process. They're really receptive to that, and sometimes they'll either cancel the rule, or they'll delay finalizing the rule, or sometimes they'll even scrap the rule altogether. So it really just depends. I think you'll see a lot more implementation on information that you provide at the state level. I would say states are generally, they don't have a full roster of scientists that are at the ready to provide information, depending on the state. And I know California, New York, they're the big wigs when it comes to state policy. But if you're thinking about a small state like, I don't know, Rhode Island or something, they don't have the bandwidth, and that's where people like you can come in and say, hey, you're interested in doing this, or you're interested in a rule on this, for whichever agency, in that state. Here's some information, that can either help or hurt what you're trying to, do related to policy. So I would say it depends.
Katie, I feel like you had.
Yeah, I was still mulling over kind of my thoughts on it. A couple different situations that I can share from my experience. I said that I really like writing the technical comments, and I can share that in some cases, technical comments that I submit are the only ones that get received, and then they are heard very loud and clearly by the agency that's working on that issue, or they will receive mine and our exact opposition, the chemical industry lobbyist work group. And so it is really important in that case, from our perspective, to have the other side and our voice be raised up. We don't want the only voice in the conversation to be our opposition. So I think absolutely in that context, our input in our scientific and analysis is really thoughtfully considered and very impactful. I also was going to share a situation. So in my introduction, I realized, Haley, I said that I work on PFAS, but people might not know what these are. These are toxic forever chemicals that stay in our body. They're associated with really harmful health effects. And I just wanted to share the story in Minnesota where the scientists were in the room, the lobbyists were in the room, but it was the personal stories from people, from community members that really push to get the legislation that was being worked on across the finishing line. And absolutely, in that case, the public testimony, the public comments that led up to that, and then the direct interaction with the legislators made an immense impact in finalizing that legislation. And it's first in the nation legislation to ban these chemicals across the class and to get them out of our everyday products. And without that really diverse scientific and policy and personal communication strategy, I don't know that it would have been as successful.
Yeah. I guess I'm just adding a little extra is that I think it's important to be a constituent. So it's really hard if you live in Illinois to have an impact on Nevada legislation, unless you're at, University of Chicago, Northwestern, you're a professor there, or even a grad student or PhD, and you've been doing your line of research and you have some publications, then, feel free to send in your scientific perspective of, PFAS, right? So I think it's important to be at the constituent level, and whatever you're interested in is at your local level just as much as it's at the federal level. And I think the other area that you guys might have an opportunity to be part of the conversation, and it was from someone that Richard that posted, is having your work brought to the attention of senators or legislators. The other public comment adjacent area is through your conferences, right? You can put together the conferences and the informational sessions and invite legislators or policymakers to the event. They may not come, but their staff may come. And that's an area where you can be impactful at your level, even right now, as if you're interested in AI or housing or chemicals, like PFAS or wildfire, like those are opportunities for public comment, and those can get a lot of traction with legislators or other policymakers, right? There are more policymakers than just the legislatures in states or in Congress. And so I think those are the two little areas that I think of: constituents and your own conferences.
Can I just add really quickly what T'Pring just said? If you invite a legislator and they send their staff, don't be disheartened by that. That's honestly a good thing, because a lot of times the staff are very specialized on specific issues or portfolios, whereas a legislator is a generalist. So they're working on a bunch of different other issues. They may not have the bandwidth to, focus in on PFAS issues, but they might have a staffer that works on science and technology policy. They maybe have worked on that their entire life. And so they might be a better person to engage with on the granular details of what you're working on and advocating why, and they can help advocate why it's important for the member to understand and take action on.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I would say it differs from state to state. My experience working with state legislatures all across the US, yeah, it's very different. Some folks have staffers and other folks are doing everything by themselves, and that's not a professional job in some states to be a legislator. So take your time and make sure that you are answering the questions that they have and meeting them where they are in terms of, like, are we starting at the very basics? Are we jumping into the middle, or are they really advanced on the topic? I think that that's important to kind of judge going into those conversations. And also, just building on what T'Pring said, a lot of the work that we do starts at the state level. So aiming for state level action first is generally how we get the bigger momentum federally.
Yeah, I think that the point of public comment is to influence, right? So we should know your audience. You should ask for what your audience needs, and then, navigate the system in the best way that you can. And always, there are tons of us that are available to assist you in those areas. So reaching out to those that have done it before you is really helpful as you're learning in your early career stages.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Could you all provide guidance on how to access information about public comment periods and requests? Are there tools or resources available for staying informed about upcoming opportunities for public engagement that you use or that you know about? It's just, how do you keep tabs on when there are things like requests for information and all of that?
Sign up for a lot of email listservs, and you actually look at those emails and don't just delete them. That's my best advice.
Same.
I would say at the federal or state level, the agency will put out, sometimes at the state level, they have an agency listserv where you sign up for notifications, and that's how they'll communicate if there's, like a request for information or possible rulemaking process. I know at the federal level, there's a website. There are two websites actually. One is regulation.gov, where you can see all of the regulatory things for every agency. Like by law to have this website for the public to go on and comment if they want to. And they generally, if you sign up for emails from, you can select agencies that you want to receive notifications on, and then as soon as let's say EPA, for example, if they put out anything, you'll get an email alert stating that EPA has put, they've published this and they're asking for comment on specific issue. Another website that puts out all of the regulatory rulemaking and requests for information is the Federal Register. It's the same thing as regulation.gov. The information is the same, but the Federal Register is just the official venue in which the agency publishes their information, for the public. And then the regulation.gov is where you can go to. It's more user friendly, where you can just go and write a comment, and post it on regulation.gov. But they're both very helpful to, just see what each agency is going on, or what each agency is doing. And then also, it will also notify you whenever a public comment period is ending. So you can filter out and see which agencies have specific comments that are closing. So if you want to know when something is due for comment, you can, you have a deadline. And then a lot of the rulemaking processes, they don't really accept submissions after the rulemaking period has ended, or I'm sorry, the request for comment period has ended. But I know that there are certain organizations that have privilege with agencies, generally members of Congress. They have the ability to submit comments after the deadline that will be for consideration by the agency.
In your legislatures, states have deadlines. So you would go on, if you're particularly interested in a bill, you would go online and find out when that committee hearing deadlines are. And they have, usually strict deadlines, like a week before the hearing date or 3 days before the hearing date. In Nevada, it's like the day, like 5 o'clock the day before the hearing. So it's different per state, per committee.
Katie, you mentioned email listservs. Like what ones? What ones do you subscribe to?
So lots of the state agencies that I work with, I'm fortunate that I don't have to go in and read the Federal Register because I have a team of people that do that. So there's just general topic issues that are on our minds that we keep very close tabs on, that our whole team kind of keeps close tabs on. But so from an environmental health standpoint, California is really important to keep an eye on. So the Department of Toxic Substances Control, DTFC. I might have just totally butchered that. Washington State has a really good Department of Ecology, and their Department of Health do really good work. So I keep abreast of what they're doing. I very much am a fan of some of the EPA offices that are doing hazard assessment, risk assessment. So I keep track of what their work is, but also they're sending out even more information. Like I'm really narrow focused on one particular chemical group, and that part of EPA is evaluating lots of different chemicals. So I have to either filter out through my email or through just like reading which ones are of interest to me. So definitely don't feel like you need to comment on everything. Like follow your expertise and think about strategically. Also, I think we haven't talked about this yet, but what's going to benefit you in your goals in your career. And yeah, I think that that's kind of an important part of the conversation that we haven't actually really touched on is like, how do you decide which ones to comment on and which ones are worth your time? And I think that that's a really important consideration as well.
Mm-hmm.
Can I just add one brief thing? If you do send a comment or information, try to find an avenue where you can post it for the public to see as well. Because I know sometimes if there's a reporter, working on regulatory issues in an area that you're working on, if they're looking for information on what people are saying about the comments what people are saying about the comment, if you have it published on like a blog or something like that, they can pull and add it into their story, and that also boosts your profile to make you look like to say like, hey, this expert is talking about this related to this regulatory comment. So always try to find a way to publish what you're saying. You could also tweet it too. I think Twitter is a great avenue to share some of your ideas about regulation and other things that are germane to your issue area.
That's a great point. A lot of times what we do at NRDC is we'll submit very, very detailed technical comments to the agency, but then we take that opportunity to write a blog that is targeted towards the media so that we can translate that really deep scientific analysis into what we think our policy solution is, our policy ideas, and or just explain what we were looking for when we submitted those comments.
Great, thank you so much. So I realized that you've been doing this throughout the webinar, but do you have any advice for advocacy committee members or audience that wants to get involved in the public commenting process that you haven't already mentioned?
Yeah, I think one of the things is just try it, right? Just go do it on something that is near and dear to your heart, that you're trained in first, that's local, and build the first, practice attempt, sort of like exercise, right? You have to start somewhere. So start small, something that's maybe less risky, and then build that relationship. So I was sort of looking at our guest list, and Serena, I think, is in California for something in a California committee, maybe BNP or something like that. But build that relationship, right? She's okay. But what committee are you in? So as a CCST fellow, she's working in a committee of emergency management. My husband is a first responder, and we were just talking about the AEDs recently. I wouldn't talk to her about that because that is not my background or my expertise. But if I have something about concussion, that is my background. Professionally, I would start a conversation. I'd pick up the phone. Surprisingly, in legislatures still, like, the phone over email is a thing. And just do that rep, right? And since Serena is part of our community, and if you have something emergency management, I am totally doing a plug for her and her work. And I don't know what she's doing right now, but it's almost break in California, so she's gonna have some time on her hands in July. And reach out, and just what an easy way to practice something right now in our community, right? And so it's scary the first time you put out a public comment. You don't know if you're doing it right. There is no templated form. It's not like an abstract where, we sort of know what we're supposed to do is the summary statement, the objectives, the results, the conclusion. It's not like that. So just do it, try it, ask for feedback, and don't be afraid to actually call someone and ask for feedback and say, hey, did anyone read this? I would say I can confirm that there are people that read public comments, even in California, a big state like that, it is read, and just try it.
I'm a fan of working with other people too and collaborating. So identifying other scientists or other organizations that you want to work with and align yourself with. I think that that's a really good way to get started. I think I was reflecting a little bit too on my last kind of comment. So I work with some scientists who are very much in the advocacy and VO space, but then I also work with scientists who are still in academia, but still sometimes take opportunities to public comment. And in those cases, they're very narrow focused on how does this move my issue? What is my scientific expertise? The communication is it's very different. It's not as advocacy oriented, but it still helps move the needle, and it provides a really important scientific perspective to those conversations. So I think that that's kind of where my comment was in terms of like, where are you in your trajectory, and are you okay being more of an advocacy voice, or do you want to continue to be a strict scientific voice? And just kind of knowing where you are as a person, I think is helpful in making sure that you don't cross lines that you're not comfortable crossing on the topics that you're commenting on.
And they are permanent. They're permanent comments.
Yeah, it's for life. It's for life. I would say my advice is, there's no strict process for this. You can do whatever you want to do, whatever makes you feel comfortable. I think at the end of the day, just being passionate about your issue, if you know your issue very well, you're passionate about it, you have something to say about it, you're willing to tell anyone about it, that will definitely get you far. And don't be afraid to find a niche, right? Because a lot of the niche people are the ones that are called up for, committee hearings. They're called up to be on panels. They're called up, they're tapped to do, a lot of these things, not necessarily by participating in the rulemaking process, but because they're sharing their information, they're telling everybody about what they're doing. So don't be afraid to find your niche, and don't be afraid to tell everybody about what you're doing. And progress, not perfection. It doesn't have to be perfect. Nothing has to be perfect. You just have to be passionate about what you're doing. That's policy.
Thank you so much. This has been a really great conversation. So now that it's 2 o'clock, I want to open it up to the audience for questions. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to unmute and ask your questions, or we'll also be monitoring the chat for questions. I did see one a little bit earlier, and to Pring, I think this might be a good question for you. But we have a question in the chat that says, how can we use these advocacy tools to develop NSPN's mission? And I think that you're well suited to respond to that one. So we'll start there.
Yeah, I think, as we're building connections, right? And so the people here are part of our network now closer than before. We're also learning. So there's an opportunity to practice and feedback and join others that are aligned, as well as the taking action. So, we particularly on Slack, but also in the committees, we talk about different issue areas. And so where there is a growth of particular interest, like let's say we do get really interested in how PFAS are affecting our communities and what's happening in each of our states. We are national, almost international organization. There are opportunities to get more involved and to become more educated in the process, and in particularly what's going on in each states and federally. And so there's a way to advance the NSPN mission through our individual actions. And so I think all of those together, the connections, the learning, and the action, are really important for the next steps of NSPN. And we're already doing that. By even coming here, you are building the network, you are taking the education, and you are hopefully going to take the actions. And I encourage you guys all, as you are taking actions, to let us know, share that back to NSPN in some way, shape, or form, through an email, through a Slack note, through a committee meeting update, to share that back so we actually know what our community is taking action on. And I bet you that your area is not so niche that not one of the 5,000 plus of us that exist in our organization right now aren't interested. So we can start building those partnerships and those coalitions and moving forward.
Great, thank you so much. So anyone else, please put your questions in the chat. I do have a question for you all. Where, and take this time to talk about your accomplishments, where has your work been the most impactful?
I can share our exciting stuff. So for the first time in 28 years, EPA had made on its own decision to regulate PFAS chemicals in drinking water. This is the first time in 28 years that EPA has regulated an unregulated contaminant without being told to do so by Congress. And that builds on several years of advocacy from scientists, from community members, to impact states. And the state action, we had a handful of states that had set MCLs, or enforceable limits, in the years leading up to that. And so just like so many public comments on scientific things, on policy things, on water, on like the whole entire big picture, I think really led up to this action. And that's something that we're super proud of and excited and grateful for, alongside the community members that we help support in getting that.
Go ahead, Janae. You might tell one that we worked on together, so who knows?
Yeah. No, maybe not that one, but
No.
I would say in my current role at GSA, one of the things that I've been enjoying to do and kind of seeing my impact there is just by getting funding from the House and Senate on a lot of the projects that we're working on to modernize a lot of our federal buildings. The average federal building is about 50 years old, and so we have a lot of sustainability goals that we want to implement to ensure that our building portfolio is net zero by 2035. So by being able to secure that funding through advocacy, on behalf of my agency, has really been very meaningful for me. Because there are so many people that are in and out of federal buildings. We have veterans in federal buildings. We have people that are going in for immigration work, senior citizens, and so just knowing that the work that I'm doing every day impacts a lot of people, really makes a difference. Thank you.
I think my most interesting thing that I've worked on recently is I was invited to participate in a housing tour that the California Assembly members were putting together. And it originally just started as taking notes on these, 8 or 9 meetings that they were having across California in different cities. And it turned into an opportunity where I actually got to write a report that had considerations and guidance for next iterations of what they could do to increase housing affordability and building in California. And some of the elected officials actually took pieces of those and put it into legislation in the new year, in the new session. And that was really exciting. So it incorporated public comment at every meeting that you would never have known about, except that you were on a listserv and you're just like, oh, what's my elected official doing in my city today? And that was really interesting.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So it seems like we're good on questions, but I really, really appreciate our panelists for talking about their experiences. This has been really great and informative.